6 myths about the age of the Nephilim. Everyone still believes. Part 1. Myth 1. The Nephilim were simply giants before recorded history. Before empires. Before the first king ever called himself a god. There was an age most people have forgotten, or been taught to forget. An age when the boundary between the human and the divine was not a matter of faith but of flesh. When beings of impossible power walked the same earth, beneath the same sun. That age has a name. The age of the Nephilim. And almost everything people believe about it is wrong. The first myth is deceptively simple. The Nephilim were giants. Enormous creatures of brute force defined entirely by their size. Towering figures casting long shadows over trembling human settlements. People believe this because the ancient texts seem to say so. The Hebrew word Nephilim has been loosely translated for generations as giants. The spies sent into Canaan returned terrified, saying that beside these beings they felt like grasshoppers. That image lodged itself deep into the human imagination and never left. But to reduce the Nephilim to size alone is to misread the ancient world entirely. The word's most compelling root points not to stature, but to the fallen, those who descended, or those who caused others to fall. What the oldest sources emphasize is not height, but nature. Their duality, half divine, half mortal. Creatures caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. They were warriors, yes, but also teachers, carrying knowledge humanity was not yet meant to hold. The Book of Enoch describes them not as mindless titans, but as complex, tormented figures bearing the weight of a forbidden inheritance. To call them merely giants is like describing fire as simply warm. But if size was never the whole story, the next myth reveals something far more disturbing. Part 2. Myth 2. The Nephilim ruled through pure fear and violence. The second myth follows naturally from the first. If the Nephilim were towering and monstrous, they must have ruled through terror. Tyrants by nature. Warlords dominating humanity through raw power and the constant threat of destruction. Popular culture has embraced this completely. Films, games, conspiracy theories, all paint the same picture. The Nephilim as oppressors, slave masters of a forgotten civilization. And there is just enough truth in it to make the lie convincing. Yes, the ancient texts speak of violence. The Book of Enoch describes a world descending into chaos as the Nephilim consumed more than the earth could sustain. The fear was real. The suffering was real. But the ancient sources also describe civilization, knowledge, architecture, music. The Watchers, the divine beings from whom the Nephilim descended, are described not as destroyers, but as teachers. They taught humanity metalworking, revealed the secrets of medicinal plants, and showed humans how to read the stars. The Nephilim did not simply dominate, they also built and organized. The myth of pure tyranny erases this complexity because a monster is easier to understand than a being capable of both devastating violence and the transmission of profound knowledge. That duality demands a reckoning most mythologies chose to avoid. What the sources truly describe as profound imbalance. A civilization built on a foundation that was never meant to exist. And if the Nephilim also taught and built, the third myth raises the most human question of all. What role did ordinary people play in that world? Part 3. Myth 3. Ordinary humans had no agency. The third myth is quieter than the others. It seeps in gradually, shaping how people imagine the age without them realizing it. The myth that ordinary human beings were simply passengers, witnesses, background figures in a cosmic drama far beyond their comprehension, waiting for whatever fate the divine and the fallen would decide. But the texts tell a far more tragic story. The ancient accounts are filled with humans who chose, who sought out the Nephilim willingly, who brought offerings, formed alliances, and built their lives around these beings, not out of fear alone, but out of fascination and ambition. The Book of Enoch makes this painfully clear. The corruption of that world was not a one-way imposition. Humanity participated. Humans asked for the secrets of weaponry. They requested knowledge of sorcery. They chose again and again to move closer to the flame. and there were others who resisted. Ancient traditions speak of lineages that held themselves apart, communities that refused what was being offered. Noah, described as perfect in his generations, stood apart in ways that went far beyond personal virtue. The age of the Nephilim was not a world without human choice. It was a world in which human choice carried consequences on an almost incomprehensible scale. And that deepens considerably with the fourth myth, the one most people never think to question. Part 4. Myth. 4. The flood destroyed the Nephilim completely. Here the story turns darker. The comfortable narrative, in which the Great Flood arrives as a clean and final solution, washing the world of its corruption, starts to crack along its edges. The fourth myth is one of finality, that the flood ended the age of the Nephilim utterly and permanently. The waters rose, the giants perished, and a purified world began. Problem solved. Chapter closed. But the ancient texts resist this conclusion. After the flood, the Nephilim appear again. Not as metaphor, not as legend. The Book of Numbers describes the sons of Anak as descendants of the Nephilim, are encountered by the Israelites in Canaan, long after the deluge was supposed to have eliminated every corrupted bloodline. Goliath belonged to a clan of Rephaim, a word most scholars place in the same genealogical shadow as the Nephilim. Some argue the divine beings who fathered the Nephilim simply did not stop after the flood, that the corruption lived in an intersection between divine and human realms the waters delayed but never prevented. Others suggest something darker, that the clean beginning was never as clean as the story needed it to be. The ancient Sumerian king lists describe rulers of impossibly long lifespans both before and after the flood, suggesting a continuity of power and knowledge the waters did not extinguish. The flood destroyed a world. It did not destroy what that world had created. And that leads to the fifth myth, perhaps the most quietly devastating of all. Part 5. Myth 5. The knowledge of the Nephilim was purely destructive. There is a deep human instinct to divide knowledge into clean categories, sacred and profane. The knowledge that builds and the knowledge that destroys. The story of the Nephilim has been filtered through this lens for centuries. The knowledge they carried was dark, forbidden, poison wrapped in light. This is the fifth myth, that everything the Nephilim knew was a curse. It served a purpose. By labeling antediluvian knowledge as inherently corrupting, the traditions that survived the flood could justify its destruction without mourning what was lost. If everything the waters buried was evil, the grief could be avoided. But the ancient texts reveal something far more complicated. The Watchers transmitted the secrets of astronomy, the movement of stars, the calculation of time, the architecture of the cosmos. They taught metalworking, which underpins every civilization that followed. They revealed the properties of plants, the origins of medicine. They shared the knowledge of writing and symbol. These are not the gifts of destruction. These are the foundations of everything humanity ever built. Every tradition that survived the flood is haunted by the memory of a prior age of extraordinary knowledge. The Egyptians called it Zep-Tepi, the first time, an age of divine perfection from which their civilization was merely a fading echo. The Sumerians described pre-flood kings who possessed wisdom later humanity could only approximate. But what if the knowledge called forbidden was not forbidden because it was evil, but because it was premature? The problem was never the knowledge. The problem was the vessel, and that makes the final myth the most important of all. Part 6. Myth 6. The age of the Nephilim is over. And so we arrive at the last myth, the foundational assumption that makes every story about the Nephilim feel safely historical, comfortably distant, sealed away in the amber of a vanished world. The myth is this, that the age of the Nephilim is over. This is the most seductive myth of all. It allows the listener to be fascinated without being implicated, to peer into that ancient darkness from behind the safe glass of historical distance. But the ancient traditions do not describe this age as a story that ended. They describe it as a cycle. Now, the Book of Enoch speaks of judgment deferred, spirits bound but not destroyed, the offspring of the Nephilim condemned to wander until the end of an age that has not yet arrived. The rabbinical commentaries on Genesis describe the sons of God as recurring figures whose intersection with humanity is a pattern, not a single event. The Babylonian sage Oannes, half man and half fish, emerges from the sea after catastrophe to teach civilization, a figure most scholars read as a memory of antediluvian transmission. Look at the oldest structures on Earth, the ones whose precision still cannot be explained by the tools of the civilizations assigned to build them. Look at the mathematical constants, the astronomical alignments, the symbolic language appearing independently across cultures with no contact. Look at how the oldest myths describe civilization not as a climb from darkness, but as a descent from a prior peak. The age of the Nephilim may not be something that happened and ended. It may be something that transformed, encoded into the structure of everything that came after, scattered across stone and text and memory, in forms not yet fully deciphered. The myths were never just about giants. They were about something the human mind has always circled without being able to fully face: the possibility that the story of this world is far older, far stranger, and far less finished than any of us have been told. The waters rose. The world began again. The age was supposed to be over. But somewhere beneath the sediment of everything that followed, something still waits. And it has been waiting a very long time.